Good morning. And in case I don't see you, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. What movie? You've probably never seen The Truman Show, but that was my way for my brother and I to pass the time. We didn't have electronics, and our dad made us listen to 60s and 70s music on the radio. So we would randomly shout out movie quotes and ask the other, hey, what movie? Today we're back in the chapter. We're taking notes. There are guided notes today, so I need you, as you watch the video, to pay attention and fill in the blanks. Now, there are only about 20 blanks this time, and really only about 5 slides of notes here. However, what we're talking about today is women and progressives. We'll break those definitions down. And it's kind of where we're at in Chapter 21. Now, by the end of the week, we're going to be taking a test over Chapter 21, which will still put us about 2 tests behind where we typically get in a normal year, which is fine. But we'll eventually make up that time or have to cut down on some information at the end of the year. So, first off today, guys, we have to let you realize or come to the effect, come to the knowledge that if women put their mind to something, they get their way. So that is the theme of today's lesson. So while we're looking at that, we'll kind of go through and see what that means in this chapter. So, progressive, Webster says, that's not Mr. Webster, that's the dictionary guy, one believing in moderate political change and social improvement by government action. So, when we're looking at the word progressive today in terms of a political standpoint, typically Democrats would be more progressive, especially when involving the government in some action, because when that steps in, if we have a government agency like your POD suggests today, like the FDA or the been in the news a lot, CDC, these government agencies, of course, are, some people think, maybe wasteful spending. So based on where you see yourself, progressives is one of the changes, and that's what we're going to be looking at. Changing things for the better is what progressive change is going to be.
Nurse Melanie Wald followed a young girl up a rickety staircase in a filthy tenement house on New York City's Lower East Side. The girl had begged Wald to help her mother, who had just given birth to a baby. A doctor had refused to treat the girl's mother because she could not pay his fee. The sight of the desperate mother and her baby was a turning point in Wald's life. Wald dedicated herself to helping poor people and educating them about health care. Eventually, Wald became a national reform leader who was known to say, "The whole world is my neighborhood."
All right, I hope you heard that, but it was just kind of discussing what was going on and noticing that in this country, a lot of people didn't have access to Medicare, or medical care, I should say. So I would then pose a question, if we're in class and the debatable topic, should our country provide medical care to its citizens? Not to an extent that we do, but generally the government is not in charge of running health care. It's not a government hospital that you go in, and there are pros and cons to both sides of the story. However, if we were to dive into the research and be able to have a good discussion on this, I think we would at least come to the notion that there has to be something, some kind of something set in place that will get medical care to people that cannot afford it. And that is something that we've had in this country for a while. Well, this was the chapter of women's changing roles. Now, the traditional role of the woman was to very simply cook, clean, take care of the kids. However, many children, after they're growing up, now that they're going to school a lot more, women's roles around the household are going to change. Life for women is getting easier also because of mechanization. Mechanization is the big fancy 5-syllable term, which means your job is now going to be easier because of machines. So back in the day, the old adage, it took you forever to clean the house. You didn't have carpet, so you had to usually take the rugs out on a tree and beat the crap out of them with a big stick, and then drag them back in the house. It was a lot easier after we invented the vacuum cleaner. So now what used to take a whole day is only taking a couple hours for women to do, and even less. Families are also becoming smaller. And the reason why, back in the day before machines, if you lived on a farm especially, you need to have lots of kids to be free labor for you. Well, now John Deere tractors can do that work. You can train your one kid to do what the John Deere tractor can do, and you can relax for a little bit. And finally, the fact that more kids are going to school. It was at mom's job, sometimes at home, to do a little bit of reading and writing with the kids, as well as arithmetic. But now, schools are popping up all over the place, and more kids are going to school, which changes the roles of women. They're sitting around bored. So women started to work outside the home. In a 20-year period, employment rose from 4 million to 7.5 million, almost doubled the amount of women in the country that are going to work. And if we raised our hands in class today, many of you live in a household where 2 people work. And sometimes because things are expensive, that is why maybe that mom has a job or dad is not the sole breadwinner in the house. Some women that didn't have to worry about working because their husbands were ultra rich formed clubs, focused on music and painting at first, but then it was realized that not everybody got to join. So my question, straw poll to the class would be, who do you think would maybe get excluded from these clubs? Well, different ethnicities was it. You could be too poor. Maybe I suck at painting or I suck at music, which I do. But the National Association of Colored Women formed a club. And their focus was not going to be on just the camaraderie, getting together and hanging out. They actually have a purpose. So they're going to focus on things like orphanage homes, hospitals, and also work for women's suffrage. And one of the mottos of this, as Mary Church Terrell was going to be their first president, was lifting as we climb. I've got a note here. Somebody said, "Is this blue?" I don't know, somebody, I guess, discussed this last year. But this is their motto. If you can see the 2 figures here, one of them here is lifting up the other one as they climb the mountain. So this is, I guess, metaphorical here. If we'd ask you to think about it for a few moments, it might be climbing the mountain to equality. And not only are they women, they're African American women. So at this time in our country's history, because there was still a lot of sexism and racism going on, they were thought down upon. They were very limited in the amount of rights that they enjoyed. So as we look at this model, they were going to be able to turn some heads and actually get a lot of things done in the country. Suffrage is not a bad thing. Here's a Susan B. Anthony dollar from 1981. So a suffragist is someone who fights for women's rights to vote. It doesn't have to be a woman, but Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony formed the National Women's Suffrage Association, and their goal was to get women the right to vote. Their secondary goal was to destroy the idea that obedience is necessary for women. So if I have a long day at work, and if I had a wife, I don't have a wife, but if I did have a wife, I come home, and you can imagine if your dad would do the same thing to your mom, come home, kick my feet up, and say, "Woman, get in the kitchen and cook me some steak." They would probably get punched in the face, or they would come back with a steak and throw it at them and say, "You go cook your own steak." So the role has changed quite a bit over the last 120 years. But when Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony grew up, they grew up at a time where they, one, didn't have a say in what happened in presidential elections, or they didn't have a say in what happened in their own household. It was always the man's job to be the breadwinner and also make all the decisions, and their job was to say, "Yes, dear," and absolutely go cook that steak, just how he liked it. That seems terrible, unless you're a man. I'm kidding. But as we're looking at the idea back in the day, suffrage is not a bad thing. And as we go through and look at women's suffrage, to fight for these equal rights, they were going to try to march in parades, have rallies, all campaigning for women's right to vote. The fight heats up. Women stretch their minds and their stomachs to earn their rights. The story of Alice Paul kind of steps out as one of the ones that was very influential in women's rights. Alice Paul got arrested in Washington, D.C. as they are protesting outside on the streets and the steps of, or near the White House, I should say. And she's walking around, picking around. If you could see me here, I'm pretending to hold my picket sign and screaming some things like she may have been saying, like, heck no, we won't go, we just want the right to vote. Heck no, we won't go, we just want the right to vote. Then the police came, so what do you do when the police come? Well, some people ran, some people stopped. Alice Paul got louder. Heck no, we won't go, we just want the right to vote. So, as you can tell, she was arrested. She was charged with blocking the sidewalk, and I don't know if that is a fat joke, but that was the charge that was literally on the arresting warrant for Alice Paul. Well, Alice Paul did not like being arrested for doing what she thought was a constitutional right of hers, so she went on a hunger strike. On the first day, newspapers said, you know, crazy women arrested for protesting, blocking the sidewalk. Don't think it was a fat joke, but newspaper articles didn't really, it was on like page 12, wasn't a big deal. Well, after about 5 days, her newspaper story went from page 12 to about page 8. 5 days she hadn't eaten a bite. And then her story eventually made it to the front page. And then the people in the jail, to prevent her from being a martyr, because she didn't eat anything for several days in a row, they force-fed her 3 meals a day. All because she wanted the right to vote. Now, several people, you know, men especially around the dinner table, are reading the newspaper and seeing this story and realizing, I forgot to vote in the last election. Crap, this woman must really want to vote. So, remember at the beginning of the lesson today, guys, I said, hey, when women put their mind to something, they generally get what they want. Well, Alice Paul and the rest of the women suffragists finally got the right to vote. They couldn't vote nationally until 1920, although the first state that allowed them the right to vote was Wyoming in 1890. So the 19th Amendment to our Constitution justified giving women the right to vote, something that men had had since the onset of the country, something that African American men had enjoyed since 1865 and the end of the Civil War, or 1870, I should say. But now, 50 years later, now women have the right to vote, so they could be equals. If you've seen the movie Mary Poppins, the old one, it's they are also suffragists. They're the woman in that is trying to fight for women's right to vote. So it wasn't just a thing in the United States. It was a problem all over the world. So here are some of the women that are casting their ballots for the first time. Well, let me erase some stuff here while we're here. The other thing on women's minds during this chapter was temperance. Typically this was a woman urging thing. And if we had the discussion on why, some of you might get it. So think to yourself for a second without just totally mind-blowing through online learning. If we had to think critically, and that's one of the things that we have been missing probably from online learning the most, being able to discuss things and critically think about them. But if you thought, why would women want temperance or want people to stop drinking? Usually it's not a woman that goes out to the bar and comes home and beats the crap out of people when they get there. And not all men do, but I guess that was the thought, that women sometimes get treated poorly at home when men come home after they've had too many to drink. So there are two driving forces in this. Not only women and the Women's Christian Temperance Union, and also the Anti-Saloon League, who in 1894 formed, in 1874 respectfully, and they decided that they didn't like people being drunk all the time, especially immigrants coming in. It's the Irish immigrants that unfortunately my ancestors may have been part of. They drank a lot in their old country. In fact, back in the day, in the 1400s, the few things that were okay to drink so you wouldn't get poison from the water you're drinking because of the extra bacteria in there was something that was fermented or I guess cooked. So it was something they did in other countries, but our culture didn't really care for it too much. Colorful leaders of the temperance crusade include Carrie Nation and a woman named Frances Woolard, who encouraged Congress to pass the 18th Amendment in 1917, and it was finally ratified, which means voted on the states by 1919. The 18th Amendment prohibited the manufacture, the sale, or the transportation of alcohol. And in the next couple of chapters, we hope we kind of get to skim through them. Prohibition actually was about a 13-year experiment. Of course, we no longer have prohibition in the United States today. However, I guess NASCAR was kind of invented during the bootlegging era because the people that went up in the mountains to get their what they called Mountain Dew, which was a concoction of some kind of a grain alcohol, they would build cars that could outrun the police in case they got caught. Well, they eventually made a sport out of it. I don't think that they were using any of the drinks while they were making the sport because driving and drinking does not mix. So here is our favorite lady of the hour here. I don't know if I usually have a theme song of the Wicked Witch on this picture, and for some reason it's not playing, but she was the barroom smasher. This is the beautiful Carrie Nation. She carried with her in a Bible one hand, and in the other hand she carried an axe. And she would be shouting scripture as she would come into the bar and smash beer bottles and kegs of beer. It is kind of an interesting woman, I should say. I usually ask for a woman in class to read this here. But lips that touch liquor shall not touch ours. And I know a lot of guys are standing in line to kiss these lips here, but there were also, pretty girls that were in favor of prohibition also. So this was a thing that was kind of growing rampant. Women didn't like their men to come home after they had been drinking. In fact, that's why my grandmother never drank. Before there was a thing called an alcoholic and meetings that people could go to, I guess my great-grandfather, who I never met, was maybe a drunk. And I guess that's what they called him. But he would come home, he would get in fights at the bar, he'd come home and he'd run his fists through the wall. And she remembered him being mean to her and being mean to her mother. So she vowed that she would never be in that circumstance. So while we look at the focus on society, it was one of those things that was kind of catching on. We generally listen to this song by Helen Reddy, who, if you've seen the original Pete's Dragon, she was the lady in the White House. Guys, this is not a great song for you to sing out loud. Even in the shower, it sounds bad. But in 1972, this made it all the way to the top of the charts. For whatever reason, it's not playing. This song. This was the theme song in 1970. Hope that wasn't ridiculously too loud. But again, kind of a catchy song, available for download at iTunes. But if you're thinking about the mindset that women were in at this time, it was something maybe to be proud of, and something that many people didn't. There were not feminists really back in the day, and women didn't, have a lot of the rights that they have today. So if we were in class, we kind of break down some of the lyrics of this song. Now, I've had classes that have karaoke'd it before, kind of comical, even the guys. But if we're looking at what women went through in this chapter, we see the kind of thing, when they put their mind to it, they have accomplished a lot. Voting tomorrow on the Electoral College, Camille Harris may be the first woman vice president. So as you're looking at all of these firsts for women, women are continuing to make strides today. So I appreciate you listening in today. Make sure that you fill out your notes and turn those in, please. We are very close to Christmas break, folks, only 4 days away. So have a good rest of the day, and we'll see you tomorrow.